Our next session brings together key education leaders from LiftEd's Development Impact Bond, who will share their experiences and lessons learned in advancing FLN at scale, working at the district level and strengthening the public education system. Please join me in welcoming our panelist, Dr. Dhir Jhingran, Founder and Executive Director, Language and Learning Foundation, Kruti Bharucha, Founder and CEO, Peepul, Manmohan Singh, Co-Founder and CEO, Kaivalya Education Foundation, and Pallavi Gupta, Lead Program Management Group, Pratham Education Foundation. Moderating this conversation, we have Vismit Bansal, Associate Partner, Dalberg, who is also the Performance Manager for the DIV. Over to you.
Very good morning to all of you. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope I'm audible. Okay, amazing. Thanks for bringing us on together, the BAT team and Ria for getting us on the stage. It's a true honor and privilege to be here, to be doing this amazing conversation, hopefully, with this panel. LiftEd has been a labor of love for many of us for the past few years. I think the whole journey that Anushri also spoke about the outcomes-based instruments and how those have evolved, and our aspiration to do something that brings together all the actors, incentives, structures to drive systemic change, which in many ways is the holy grail for many of us working in the education sector. So for this conversation, I think what we'll try and do is understand from all of these amazing leaders whose organizations have been at the forefront of driving systems change on the ground, their motivations and how they perceive outcomes-based structures to drive that change. 2 years in, what they have been learning and what sort of lessons are we able to draw for the wider ecosystem as well at this point of time. And we'll try and keep it very tight, but also try and squeeze in a few questions from the audience as well. So that's what we'll try and do. And with that, maybe I'll jump into my first question. Like I said, LiftEd has been, in many ways, a bold experiment to try and bring together something that was not previously done before. Align incentives, fundings, to try and shift very systems-level indicators in a very measurable way. And I know that a lot of you have been thinking about it as well. And with that, I'd love to understand and dig a bit more beyond the surface into your own motivations for trying something like this. I know it takes a lot of effort to get into a structure like this. And with that, maybe Manmohanji will come first to you. For Kaivalya Education Foundation, it's the second time that you're participating in such an instrument. Obviously, for 4 years, we were together on the QEI DIP journey as well. So if you could speak to us a bit more about what was the motivation of trying to now broaden the canvas and getting into systems change and outcomes-based financing.
Thank you. Namaskar, everyone. There were multiple reasons. First, DIB, we were part of this in Ahmedabad and Mumbai. I think those cities are quite famous. And there were lots of learning, even in that DIB. It was not easy because outcome-based thinking itself in the social sector, the way DIB brought was new, lots of learning, lots of challenges also, given, the Mumbai, when we did the first set of workshop with the principals of the schools, many of them, their children were studying in the top 20 universities in the world. So their vocabulary was very different. Versus when we were working in Ahmedabad, the conversation is very different. And the challenge is because in Mumbai you have migratory population and a lot of student comes from there, multiple languages. So it was very, very different work there. And we learned quite a bit. There, we were ensuring that because of our presence and whatever action we were doing, outcome were achieved. But this DIB, I think the first reason is the system change. Because since the beginning of Kaivalya Education Foundation, we realized that only option we have is to enable government instead of creating a parallel structure. So how do we work with the systems? The first is the system change. That was excitement. The second reason why, we are extremely motivated even now and in future, as the presentation happened, is where, if you look at the investment outside the government, where are private investment, if I can call private as this as well, outside government, where are we investing money? And if I give you just one number, the CSR, social responsibility, where are we spending that money? Pune district alone has about 300 per capita Indian rupees investment, just in Pune. But if you take eastern state, it is around 19 rupees per capita. But need is more that side. So now through this, we are working in Balrampur, we are working in Chitrakoot, Aurangabad, Nawada, aspirational district, which was most backward. So if we are able to deliver something there, there is chance that it will work for the areas where it is needed most. That is the second reason why we are motivated. The third is, I think, the collaborative. Right, when you have 20 partners, and just, I noticed that the government logos are not here. But I think government, the amount of money, if we look at per child spent by the government, Himachal almost 60,000, to Bihar 10,000, to Rajasthan about 40,000, right? So I think, how do we enable that? So all the system indicator we looked at here is about enablement, and there are different learning. So the process is set up at the moment, right? The reviews, what Dalberg is trying to do, what BAT is trying to do. I think that raises a lot of question internally for us as well, that what is going right, what we can improve, what we can learn from the others. So I think this design itself is the third excitement. So these are the three reasons.
Amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing. I think both the systems change aspect of it, but also what you just said about coming together as a collective, collaborative, and being able to learn and reflect on how we work together to drive those outcomes, I think is a very interesting aspect. Dhir, maybe let me come to you next. You've also done the literacy div first. This is the second time you are participating. And again, the focus for the first DIB was also on foundational literacy and numeracy. But this time, the canvas again is wider. So if you could also speak to your motivation of doing this instrument, but in a different format and a different sort of canvas. Yeah.
Thank you. So the Haryana DIB happened much before there was NIPUN. This was 2019 to 2021. And of course, we had great learning from there in terms of how data can be used to track and improve teaching learning processes and outcomes. And also, how do you work with state governments? Of course, that was the focus anyway at that time. But with NIPUN happening, obviously, as Manmohan was saying, it was all about the government taking the lead, and how do you ensure that the effectiveness and efficiency of the government system can be enhanced. So that is a big change. And as Manmohan said, I think our motivation was this, because we've believed ever since we were established 10 years back that change can be sustained at scale only through ownership by the government. And for us, the results of 3 to 4 years of a program, one of them, important one, is of course the improvement in the learning of those 2 or 3 cohorts that go through the program. But even more importantly, has the system at the state, district, and block and school level got strengthened during implementation? Are there priority practices that have got institutionalized or getting institutionalized, which can continue for some more time? And that's why this DIB was attractive for us, because it was an indirect government-led approach and a focus on identified system shifts. So even today when we are working in the DIB, we are very focused on that district, but also looking at how the learning can be mainstreamed almost in real time to what can happen at the state level and be a part of the statewide implementation. Smaller things like how good cluster meetings can be done, how protocols for academic support can be changed. So that perspective of this district being a place where children's learning will improve, but also where it's going to inform the whole system for statewide improvement.
Now, I would love to come back to that in just a few minutes, but Kruti, let me come to you next. For people, this is the first time participating in an outcomes-based instrument, but of course, as an organization, you've been working very deeply with state governments, administrations to drive reform at scale. So from that to decide to experiment and participate in OBF instruments as a means of accelerating that change, if you could speak to both the motivations, but also a bit of your journey on how that's been going.
Yeah, sure. So, I think as an organization in our DNA, we are very open to embracing opportunities, right? And actually exploring new avenues for driving impact. So I think when the Development Impact Bond, first of all, there was a lot of buzz in the space, right, about development impact bonds. And I think if I just start there, right, we were very curious about, what's so special about a DIB? What does the construct look like? We've been funded by grants, and so what is unique about a DIB? It sounds very complex to have 20 people together, and then to have an evaluation agency, and then a performance manager, and somebody else who's a transaction manager. It seemed like it was quite onerous, right? But at the same time, we were driven by our curiosity to understand more. So I think for us, our journey was very much about exploration in the beginning, about what exactly is this instrument, and how can it actually come together to provide an alternative way of actually thinking about systemic shifts and learning indicators. I think for us, fundamentally, so it started with the curiosity and the exploration. I think again, another part of our DNA is actually knowing how to work with government systems, right? So when we thought about the purpose of this DIB, which is different from your first DIB, the QEI DIB, which was a more direct intervention, this is more indirect. So it was very much in alignment with our model and approach, which is actually that you work with the government as a catalyst, you actually unlock government resources, budgets, so on and so forth, and you actually try to drive change working with another stakeholder as opposed to doing it yourself. So fundamentally, there was a lot of alignment in terms of what the DIB was trying to achieve through the construct and what we actually wanted to make happen. And therefore, we wouldn't have to do anything different, or we wouldn't have to actually change our operating model to be able to actually participate in the DIB. I think the thing that was unique about this particular DIB was the learning year. And so that gave us a space to actually understand the construct, see if it worked with our model and approach, and then understand how evaluation, setting of metrics, so on and so forth would happen. So the learning year was actually a very fertile year for us, where everybody was kind of in that journey together, exploring, understanding, tweaking, iterating, and then figuring out what the full-scale DIB would look like. So that's where the kind of motivation came from, just the exploration, curiosity, the construct of the DIB, and then the fact that there was a learning year. Having said all this, I think we were also quite cautious, perhaps, because at the end of the day, if you compare the financial instrument of a DIB with a grant that you might receive, a DIB is much more risky, right? And there are multiple stakeholders involved. And so a lot of it also depends on the risk appetite that an organization is willing to undertake. So for us, I think we were quite cautious because there's upside in terms of visibility, the positive effects of the DIB going very well and student learning outcomes kind of being achieved or exceeded. But there's also a huge downside in terms of credibility and reputational risk, right? And I think on balance, you have to kind of be comfortable with, it could go either way. It could end up being extremely successful, but, and fingers crossed, or it could actually end up being very different to how you had thought you would implement the program. So I think we went into it also with caution. And at the end of the day, we looked at, who's around the table in this consortium. And it came down to just trusting every person and every organization that is around the table, realizing that everybody is actually working with the same intent and outcomes in mind, and knowing that when there is conflict or when there is difficulty, you can trust all of the partners to arrive at the right decision for the child and the system. So that's where we kind of ultimately took the decision to kind of be part of this.
No, and thank you so much for sharing. I think the learning year aspect also resonates very strongly with me. I think that was a very critical sort of period where we were able to work together, build that trust. I think while everybody knew about each other in terms of organizations, but that period of exploration, putting more structure to our exploration and building that trust, I think so strongly resonate that with feeling. Pallavi, let me come to you next. For Pratham, outcomes focus has always been, you know, the hallmark or the sort of central aspect of how you operate. Also, as an organization that's been at the forefront of doing research studies, rigorous quasi-scientific studies as well. What made you take that risk? As Kruti pointed out, an outcomes-based instrument is a different mode compared to what Pratham typically runs for its programs. So would love to hear that.
Thanks. Hello. Yes, thanks, Vismit. I think you're right. Pratham's always been very, very outcome-focused. We've always worked towards trying to measure how a program is doing. I think Asar is a larger conversation that we wanted to share with the world, but even individual programs that we run, we want to make sure that we're constantly measuring and iterating on the go. But as Kruti also just pointed out, it's very rare to find many people coming into a conversation with the same intent of systemic change. We have a lot of funders and projects that come to us, but I think the focus on the end goal of learning outcomes as a primary goal, rather than the scaffolding that we can provide to the government as a primary goal, is quite rare. And I think that was one of the key reasons we were also interested in this DIB. Also having an opportunity to work with multiple parties, learn from other people. I think there is a level of isolation in this sector sometimes where you feel like you're fighting this battle alone. So having that shared commitment towards the same goal is always good, and you learn a lot more, and you get data verification of the data that you're also collecting, which helps to boost your confidence in whatever you are doing. We've been working with him in Himachal much before the DIB with the government. But the DIB allowed us to go deeper into this project. So it allowed us to relook at what is it that we are doing and how can we modify this approach based on the pillars that the DIB had set out. So right now also, for example, in Himachal, we're working in 4 districts with the DIB, and in the rest of the districts in Himachal, we are doing a different format of systemic change with them. So this actually for us is great because it allows us to also compare what solution would ultimately work better to help systemic change in Himachal and improve FLN over there. So I think the final point that I'd like to make is that, because I think many of my panel members have already covered a lot of the points, is the DIB allows us also to explore how do we prevent dilution of the intent from the central level ultimately down to the last teacher. So to the district, to the block, to the cluster. How do we prevent the dilution of the intent that we set out for by then helping build these scaffolds across all these levels? And I think that's something that we're very interested to see, and that was, year 1 was experimenting on that. I think year 2 is now helping the government and ourselves by understanding how can data assist in this, but also what is a simple enough method that can be retained by the government, whether or not we remain in this project and basically after we leave as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. I'd love to come to that theme in just a second as well, about how do we ensure sustainability and how do we create the right structure so that this continues even if we are not there. But a common sort of intent is about systems change, preventing that dilution. And while we are working in certain districts, making sure that that translates to state, central government, and how all of the system actors work together. Dhir, I know you've been thinking about systems change quite a lot. We have also had some conversations. So through the experience of the past 2-3 years, we'd just love to hear about how you have started to conceptualize that systems change. Through the DIB, how has that evolving today? And even what are questions that even you have that remain unanswered today? So we'd just love to pivot to that.
Thank you. I'll deviate a little bit from the panel dharma and go into a short monologue. And I have the reluctant agreement of the moderator on this. As you said, because system change is close to my heart and we've discussed this a lot. I think given the fact that all of us here in this room are focused on design and implementation of large-scale programs led by the government, it's very clear that sustainability and system strengthening and system change is a part of the work we are doing. So there's no need to really emphasize why that's important. But I want to start by saying system change is complex. And there are many stakeholders, many factors that influence whether the change is going to stick or not. And our ways of measuring impact until now in impact bonds and outcome-based projects haven't delved into that. We've looked at effect sizes, learning adjustment years of schooling, but not so much about, what exactly is changing and how is it going to sustain? What are the different stakeholders' perceptions about this change as they go forward? Because that's really crucial if that change is going to stick. Why are they adopting or not adopting certain ways of working? So knowing that the way we've looked at impact has been inadequate if we are going to look at system change really. I would say education change or education sector is system-oriented but also human-centered. All of us who work know that, and human-centered at all levels. I mean, if we're talking about social networks that operate with teachers and others at the grassroots level. But we also know, all of us who've been talking about system change know that once a leader changes, all that we say, the system is so individual-oriented in the states that we work in. So many things change. I could give you many examples of where the salience for FLN has either come down or gone up. The working with institutions like SCRTs, there's been views of the leaders about who should be involved. Student assessments, again, someone comes in and says, no, we're going to do quarterly assessment of every child and get their results up. So lots of things change. Even though we say system, there are individuals there, and those individuals can and change things. So just to say that there are certain other challenges in looking at system change. One, that it is often non-linear. It's very difficult to say the system is going in this direction. It can be very entropic, right? As we always say, like a few steps forward, a few steps backward, and you feel like what's happening. It's also difficult to define very clear metrics for that change, right? Except for a few in the SSIs of DIB. We made a good beginning, but defining larger indicators is not so easy. And there are many influences, as I said. You're working and things going smoothly, and suddenly a state says, English is the medium of instruction. Overnight, everything goes for a toss. So just to say that system change is complex, measurement is complex, but because all of us are working with systems, it is our duty to be able to look at what's happening with the systems. Are things changing or not? So a few dimensions of change that we think are very important, there's been discussion with the Dalberg team as well on that, is policies and programs. Are they moving in a direction where there is greater salience, let's say, if we're looking at foundational learning. So today, if I look at the sector, I would say foundational learning, yes. But if you look at linguistic diversity and multilingual approach for foundational learning, we are not mature yet. So there are things in which the ways, if you create frameworks, we can look at how our policies and programs are moving. Is there an increased commitment in terms of pronouncements and resources? It seems as if yes, for foundation learning, but I was in 3 states in the last 15 days where direct benefit transfers, which have been currently mandated after elections, are squeezing funding for entire education, but even for foundation learning. There was negotiation about the number of pages in workbooks, etc., because we had to give out monies for the schemes that have been promised. Another way of looking at change is there a structural change happening or not in the government system? For example, today, whenever we go to, all of you interact with state governments, in the states that we work in, there's 1/4 of one person responsible for Nipun Bharat or FLN. That person who's nodal for FLN also does 4 other things. Is there a Nipun Bharat cell? Is there a foundation learning that can be, that is not our own? We are there in large numbers, right? There are halls filled with partners, representatives in many states, but the state's own structure, how's that? Even institutions, how are they evolving? Have SCRTs improved their ability to develop high quality materials? Are they stronger today? Do they have better faculty members? Right now it's difficult to see that shift happening. And then of course there are larger issues about enabling conditions like teacher shortages, pre-service reform. Is that happening or not? Because that is essential for Nipun as well. So just saying that there are important dimensions that can be looked at, but of course we should not confine just to the state level, also look at what is therefore the impact at the district and block levels. For example, is a block education officer thinking of himself or herself as a change agent for changing classroom processes and learning? Instead of just saying, I'm doing a set of administrative work, various schemes, etc., are they seeing themselves as leaders for instructional change? Is that, so it needs to be seen apart from state level. I'll end by saying that there are lots of challenges in measurement. This is something that we've been discussing also. It does require a long time frame, right? Change cannot be looked at, in 1 or 2 years. The challenge then is, what was the baseline? Because we are already into something. How do you establish where we were at a point in time? And also whether this change that we are seeing is not a flash in the pan, is something that's going to sustain. So the risk is that we see a lot of activity in a state, almost frantic activity around FLN. Is that representative of something that's going to stick and sustain? Will it continue? Is difficult to understand unless we, of course, have a strong research process. How do we isolate the impact of centrally funded programs, right? I mean, what will happen if Nipun Bharat funding or Nipun Bharat salience stops? Is that going to, how do we look at that? That's important. Government pronouncements, lots of government orders, etc., doesn't mean that things are going to stick or sustain. The methodology of looking at how system is changing is complex because you will depend upon interviews, etc., and interviews will have biases. Someone is working on it now, and NGO partners like us, we will definitely want to think that the system is changing. We have a vested interest in this. So obviously this has to be done more externally to look at how systems are changing. So I'll end by saying that system change and strengthening is crucial. This is something which I think it's a sacred duty for all of us. Its measurement is complex, and I think what's more important is that let's contribute to looking at how systems are changing or not changing in a manner that is which we step back from what we are doing with the governments. It's a strong contribution that we can make to the education ecosystem in India as well as outside. Thank you.
I love this rebellious streak in Dhir, saying I don't care about the panel, I'm going to say my piece.
There was indeed a reluctant agreement about this just 1 minute before the panel, so that was aligned on before I had forewarning. But no, I think you mentioned all of the points that have been tossing around in my head as well. It's complex. I think the articulation of what is systems change is indeed, I think, an evolving process that we all have to continue to work towards and see what that means in both the short, medium, and long term. I think on the DIB, we've made a call where we're looking at the district and the block level from a measurement perspective to seeing how behaviors and attitudes and practices are changing at the district and block level. But of course, there is a sort of wider boundary for that as well. Kruti, maybe let me come to you next on just that aspect of it about changing behaviors of stakeholders that are directly in the schools or directly supporting the schools. I know Peepul as an organization has a very fail fast, learn, iterate, and then sort of rollout approach that you've been practicing in the DIB, but also now in your wider collaborations with the government. So love to see, understand from you how that approach of how you are going about that approach of understanding what is working to change certain behaviors, what are some lessons that you're drawing and now maybe also taking to your other programs. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can just start by saying, all of us are working with government as a key stakeholder and as the primary agent of change. Governments are big, and we keep talking about how governments are where scale happens, and of course they're complex. Governments are also not dumb. There are many intelligent spaces within a government, many intelligent people within a government who are actually championing change in their own way. So I think one thing that's perhaps important is also that we are not saving the government. We're not saviors of the government system. We're there to actually strengthen the government system and to be the enabler to actually take forward and support those champions of change, And so I think one thing is identifying who those champions are, who those agents of change are. As Dhir said, at the block level, at the cluster level, there are many individuals who are actually going into classrooms. So one, saying we are going to actually, from the get-go, actually involve those champions when we are co-creating the solution. It's not going to be something that we do and then we kind of pass on to the state and say, this is, the formula for success, and, let us please execute this together and co-implement. I think it's that process of co-creation with champions of change from the very beginning. I think also, the government system is large, complex, good in many ways. Sometimes we also come at this with the intention of innovation, right? We think of our role as providing that innovation. I think I would perhaps say that, we don't, when we were thinking about what we would do for our DIB, in terms of specific area of focus, we don't want to innovate for innovation's sake, right? And I think even in a government system, you don't want to just shift an entire system because you have a particular innovation that you think will work, right? Ultimately, you are impacting, millions of children. If you don't have full clarity on how that solution will work at scale, you should not go down that path. So having said that, I think our approach has been, when it comes to experimenting, iterating, which is a question you were asking, to actually do that from the very beginning with your champions of change within the government. As we do that, there is another element of how do we then build that into the way that we are also tackling the program. So a couple of things there. I think the learning year that we had was a huge opportunity because I don't think any other DIB has had a learning year. So I think the learning year gave us that safe space to actually say, let's explore. We haven't quite figured out and we don't have the solution set in stone, but we do know kind of the direction in which we're heading. Let's actually play with that a little bit in a safe space, which is the learning year, and then figure out, what's working, what's not working. And let's be fully transparent about that, right? And share that with the consortium as well as with other implementation partners. I think the second thing I would say is, my team is very adventurous, right? So, oftentimes I didn't know the extent of experimentation that was actually happening on ground. I think my approach is just hire really great people and then let them just figure it out themselves. But I think the fail fast is also something that, because of the learning year, the team actually took that on to an extent where there was innovation, using data to actually see what was working, what was not working, and then pulling back and being very honest and transparent, saying, we actually don't think this is going to work. So that safe space internally is extremely important. And that safe space, both internally as well as externally, when you have champions of change, because you know that level of honesty and transparency just leads to sustainability of that reform effort with your main government stakeholder as well. Because the reason that they will probably sign up for a reform initiative is because they also, you know, trust the folks at the other side. And that trust takes time to develop. It also happens when there are fully honest conversations. I think data is what plays a really important role in this. When you are failing fast and you are in that constant prototype, iteration, course correction, it's very important to not just go on 5 data points and say, well, we think this is working. It's very important to set your metrics early on what we think success looks like. Keep that in mind. And actually, when you are either succeeding or failing, you're doing it with the anchor of those particular set of metrics that you have, so that you can actually tangibly understand whether or not you're failing or succeeding.
No, thank you for saying that. I think with data and not making sure that we also get ahead of ourselves on picking and cherry picking some data points and metrics and saying this is working and just doing it for the sake of doing, but being very honest to ourselves and the ecosystem, I think I strongly resonate with. Pallavi, and you mentioned it in your first set of remarks as well, for Pratham, Himachal Pradesh, where you are intervening in 4 districts as part of the LiftEd DIB, is a wider statewide partnership. You also work on other aspects of education there, for example, the early childhood program, but even in other districts on foundational literacy and numeracy. And data is a part of those conversations. There is always a dynamic of engaging with this government stakeholders at different levels. So if you could speak to about how or what sort of lessons from that, almost, if I may use the word, intensive sort of rollout in the districts that you are intervening as part of DIB, what sort of lessons or experiments or data is coming out of there that you are able to share with the government, and how to your other to programs in the other districts, and how that conversation's going, evolving. If you could share a bit more insight into that with us.
Sure. So I'd like to start by saying that systemic change, first of all, is possible, and you do see results. I think Himachal Pradesh is a great example of what can happen when change is embedded into the system. So Himachal Pradesh not only has gone back to its pre-pandemic learning outcomes, but actually exceeded it. And it's one of our biggest success stories in the country to see how far they have come. And I think if anybody has time, please do talk to our state head here, who is sitting on this table at a break, to understand what's happening behind closed doors in conversation about Asar at the state level. But as you mentioned, data is only a conversation starter. Data helps define the objectivity on which we can build a foundation of a program and change that we want to then implement. But it does provide a starting point that everybody can agree on, and then build custom changes that can be made at different levels. And I think the customization is different to the dilution that I was talking about earlier. So making sure that we give process that is not so rigid, allowing different levels at a cluster, block, district and a state level to make changes and observe, reflect and modify at their capacity and with their agency is, I think, extremely crucial, and it's been a great learning for us, because a cluster head teacher who's going into a school observing is, first of all, aware himself as to what are the challenges that this teacher has, what are the challenges the school has, what are the modifications that can be made when he is present and observing and reviewing. So giving that freedom is very, very important. So customization at every level also helps to build agency and potentially build that sustainability as well. The data, what we've been doing is these joint visits, because sometimes it's not easy to put into a language the kind of feedback that you want to give. We are helping provide that construct of feedback that a cluster head teacher can give, a block education officer can give, or district official can give. So we're really giving that language to them, giving the data to be like, okay, where is the change really needed? Where is the focus needed? And guiding them into picking more challenging areas to focus on first to see the maximum change. So we do want this freedom to explore and build on these people, because they are going to be here much after we leave this project as well. And I think Pratham's always believed in this. Pratham has always worked with middle management. It's always worked with clusters and blocks. And because at the end of the day, as Dr. Dhir was also saying, it's a human, there's so much human element that is involved, and that can change at any point, and that can change then the intent. But as long as centrally there is a focus on driving FLN, we know change is possible because we are seeing it happen at this point of time. We just need to provide the right guidance at all levels to make it more long-term.
No, thanks. Thanks for sharing those perspectives again. I think it's, like you said, data is one aspect of it, but the almost the complementary aspect of it, or even I would say an equally important aspect of it, is giving everyone the language to speak about it in the right manner and making sure those interactions happen in a constructive way towards the ultimate goal of children and students being able to learn. Monji, if I come to you next, and just building on that thread of data and language, I know that for the KEF team that has a very holistic intervention of looking at how we bring along the entire system at the district and block level, that data is one aspect of it, but also how we shape those interactions, what is the language that we bring to these conversations, so that there is also almost intrinsic inspiration or motivation that is generated to continue to drive change long after one has exited. So if you could share a bit more about your learnings on that aspect from the DIB, also how in that sense, if bringing together this inspiration aspect of it and also different actors, not just government, but also communities, etc. How do you see that and what lessons are you drawing from the DIB on that front?
Yeah, thanks. So before that, I just want to comment a little bit on system change. When we started in 2008, that if you have a motivated and competent school leader, there is a chance that the school will be transformed. And I remember people used to laugh on face. कि ये नेता बना रहे हो आप, नेता का ही तो प्रॉब्लम है देश में, और नेता बना रहे हैं, right? And it took many years to say teacher role is different than the school leader, right? A school leader has a role in social leadership, instructional leadership, institutional leadership, a lot of other aspects, personal leadership. Headmaster has to be the best master, which means you need to demonstrate in the classroom that how do you facilitate learning, right? And as data you're saying, so we were extremely happy in first 2 years because we saw many behavioral change of individual leaders. But when Education Initiative did the third party, learning outcome was not improved. It was almost same as without intervention. So we realized that, oh, we are all happy because behavioral change we are able to observe. Headmaster threw chair out of the classrooms. There was no stick on the table, right? They were sitting in the circle. There were multi-grade, multi-level. All of that was happening. But learning outcome didn't improve. So we realized leadership is for what? Leadership is for outcome. So we thought that we should close down the organization only. This is not working. But a lot of people gave input in system change, and this was one of the pain points, and grateful to the DIB and all of you who are supporting this. that the learning outcomes will take time. It is not going to happen immediately. Number two, learning here is that I think in the sector, if we work with the government, many of us, including us, we also had this assumption. We did analysis in many projects. We realized that just working with the government is not system change. Right? Teacher nahi hai, aap unke saath kaam kar rahe. May not be leading to system change at all. Right? PLM nahi hai, to aap bana do. That is not system change at all. So what is system change? Therefore, how do we understand that when it will lead to system change? When we are looking at the data, let's say you're providing data today, you have rigorous process and Vismit and team is coming again and again, ye data galat hai, data sahi hai, you know, and there are feedback which is helping our team. Now imagine if the government has to do it, what is the process we are setting up so that it will be institutionalized? So I think, are we thinking of, you know, there is a Donella Meadow theory of change. If you want, please read. We have benefited a lot from that. That what are the levers where you can intervene in the system? And I think a general understanding is our learning that we directly go to capacity building. And that is because visually, you know, you can see, you can measure that I have done this much and this is the change. That is one of the intervention. Are we working on mindset change? Are we working on shifting the goal of the institutions? So if there is a State Institute of Education Management and Training, CMAT, what about that structure? Have we looked at that? SCRTs or the finance angle? Feedback loop, are there positive and negative feedback loop? Have we looked at the causal diagram? Example, if there is absenteeism, बच्चे नहीं आ रहे school regular, why are they not coming? And our learning is in many of these areas, education is not the answer. Child is not regular because father is not at home. यहाँ पे पाठक जी हैं, बहुत सारे लोग हैं, उनको पता होगा, बहुत सारे शिक्षा के बाहर का कारण है, right? Which can't be solved through education, right? Scholarship उसको नहीं मिली है, घर में डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस हो सकता है, उसके कारण वो इरेगुलर है, खेती का काम चल रहा है, उसमें चले गए हैं, अर्ली मैरिज है. There are multiple other social reasons which is also impacting education. There could be health reason. So when we are looking at the data, this is helping us because if say BPMUs, structured BPMU, agenda in advance, there are conversations, there are decisions, there are follow-up. Now, this can be institutionalized. And it can also improve the way we are thinking about, you know, system change, that not just BPMU, but at the district level also. It can happen at the school level also. So I think this system change angle and the indicator which is here is helping other project. And what we are doing in other project, example in community, how do you leverage community? We have talked about Sarkar Samaj Bazaar. So Samaj, who is Samaj? Of course, NGOs comes from Samaj and our understanding is Samaj. But let's say one of the block of Aurangabad, where let's say there are 200 schools, I don't live in that block. So people who live there, religious leader, the volunteer, the local NGOs, the SHG, right? All of them, how do you leverage their jungle, jameen, jaat, pani, jhagda ke concept? Because that is also influencing education. And the bridging the gap between school and the community, that can happen, you know, like, you know, Saja has been working for a long in bringing the community together and their role in learning. And this can also lead, you know, हमने काफी बात किया है कि learning is not just inside four walls. Community can play a role. So I think these are some of the learning on system change, and also system change मतलब सरकार के system का change. But I'm also talking about community system change. And if we look at these both, then there is chance that Sarkar and Samaj can come together and Bazaar can bring these instruments to help do governance better.
I'm being given the timer. Yeah. No, so we'll try and wrap up on time. But I think that was a very, thank you Manmohan ji for that overview, and also how teams on the ground and how your operating philosophies working towards driving change at multiple interactions levels. So one of the things that at least in our interaction with and working closely with all of the 4 organizations on the stage through the course of the DIP that we've realized is that while we may have picked a set of changes that we measure and report on, there is actually a lot of work in trying to shift every single interaction that is happening, whether that is between the community and the school, between the school leader and its the teachers, the school leader and the, let's say, the cluster or the block official, and bringing both data and language to that in a very constructive setting, not as us being others who are providing certain input or feedback, but making sure that those conversations happen organically so that there is a realization in that collective set of actors who are there on the field towards what is it that we want to aim for and driving towards, I think is how the work's happening. Of course, how that translates into policy and state level decisions and funding is something that's an ongoing conversation. We have around 5-7 minutes. So what we'll do is instead of going to my next question, perhaps open it up to the audience and try and squeeze in a couple of questions at least for the panel. One request, as you share your question, if you could state your name and organization, and if your question is directed to a specific panelist, that would be great. We'll try and take a few of those as well. I see a hand up.
Hello. Yeah, hi. My name is Nikita. I'm from Masoom, and thank you for the insightful conversation. So my question would be to any one of the panelists, and it's more around the systems change and the institutionalization of the changes that we want to see. So my question is, can we have these quantitative structural changes designed in the impact bonds for the government? We spoke about fully functional NIPUN cell. We've been working with the government in Maharashtra, Uttarakhand and Gujarat, and we've been trying hard to do this, but there are challenges. But when we put in resources, at the beginning of the conversation, if we have some quantitative outcomes for the government, say by 26, 27, if NIPUN Bharat has to be fully functional, and then in each spaces that we are working, there could be a fully functional NIPUN cell. And while we are putting the resources, it's an agreed outcome that we are, aiming towards. Second could be a steering committee of all the PPP stakeholders, irrespective of whether the bureaucrats come in and go out. The committee members will stay and carry on the vision and the outcomes that were meant for within a specific time frame. And also I think that we spoke about behavioral changes, attitudinal changes. They go away with very good headmasters going out, good teachers going out. So can we formalize them through assessments which are a part of the system, which can be actually continued irrespective of people coming in and going out. So I think if these bonds when we have these quantitative outcomes defined, there should be quantitative outcomes defined for the government as well, because we go and say that these are the resources we are bringing to the table, expertise from the implementing organizations, so many people putting so many resources. Can we agree on these things by so and so time? We come up with this. And then you sign up. I don't know if that can be done. So there's a responsibility for the government as well to set up these platforms.
I think you also, in a way, answered the question. I don't think we can sit at the table and say we are here to change you and let's set targets for your change. But of course, there are ways in which some of the very specific things that you mentioned, for example, having people dedicated to FLN or a steering committee, etc., can definitely be defined. But I think we should also be aware of, as you mentioned, attitudes and practices down the line and a longitudinal change that will sustain, which will require some more thinking of indicators and how to measure.
I think maybe one thing if I can just add, I mean, oftentimes, I think you're absolutely right. Those are the conversations that we should be having with government, and many governments are very open to actually talking about, what those metrics should be, the reason perhaps that it hasn't always happened yet, I think two reasons. One, sometimes when an organization is entering a state, they may themselves not have full clarity around what success looks like. They may not have full clarity around what does that set of metrics mean when it actually comes to that change actually happening at the last mile. So you can't ask the government necessarily, or you can't propose something to the government when you're not fully sure, because systems change is complex and you're not sure how a program might eventually play out. I think that's one thing. I think the other is that the space around systems change, systems orchestration has also been evolving and maturing over the last 3 to 4 years. And I feel like we're now at a place where there are enough organizations actually undertaking systemic reform, systemic change effort, systems orchestration, where we now have a point of view around what it means to actually measure systems change. And therefore now, through collective action or through kind of, events like this or events where you're actually shaping the ecosystem, you do have a set of very specific metrics that you could take to a government. Those are the two things I would just add to what Dhir said.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question. We'll go to the next one. Yeah, okay.
Therefore, are there things that could be done within DIB, set up some guardrails also around saying how do you ensure that sustainability is maintained, right? Like through community or through certain other things. Is there a process to think about sustainability when we're thinking about systems change?
So yes, that's the whole idea, right? System change itself, there is assumption is that there will be system which will be sustainable, right? So let's say you work in SMC and you remember Delhi government has taken one decision to give money directly to the SMC, right? Saying let SMC take decision on certain indicator and there is now system, right? If we ensure that there is a selection process, there is a capacity building process, there is a governance process of SMC by laws and there are adequate resources and governance, hopefully that will be sustainable if we are able to do the leadership work as well. Not just system and process, but also people inside the system. There are multiple examples, right, that how it can work. So let's say, wherever you have a Shiksha Sankul, right, Bihar doesn't have today, suddenly, as Dhir was also mentioning that maybe you will not have this funding only, right? So in that context, it's system designed in a way which can adapt quickly based on a new situation. There are areas in Assam which is flooded. So school has to move somewhere else every year in some areas. It's system designed to ensure that whenever that happens, there are process, there are roles within the system who knows what to do, like in disaster situation. This is different situation, right? So assumption is sustainability. And I think the challenge is that the way we all are aligned in the learning outcome, and there are multiple tools available to say whether learning outcomes is improving or not, we do not have a one single source of truth that, system change happened or not happened, right? And I'm hoping through this conversation, slowly in next 5-10 years, if we are able to create enough evidence that what system change indicator are, in what context it will work, what context it will not work, what can be constant indicator, what could be flexible indicator, based on geographical challenges, based on state investment also, right? So hopefully through these, sustainability might come. But one constant challenge I see, we have more school than the resources. So wherever we go, that's always a problem. यहाँ पे बहुत सारे सरकार के लोग बैठे हुए हैं कि हमारे पास ज़्यादा स्कूल है, लैब की कमी है, कंटेंट का बहुत सारा कमी है, right? How do you address that as a system? If we ask that question, maybe there will be new answer for a different geography.
I'd just like to I also want to add that I think it's good if we study what has been adopted by the system sustainably beyond what the organizations had proposed. So for example, in Himachal, there is a program that runs called Pehli Shikshak Ma. Now we've always spoken about how parental engagement is very important to the child's development, and mothers especially in the early years age is very, very crucial. The government has realized the importance of it, the interest of it, but more importantly, they found a simple enough method to apply it to the entire state and run it without our assistance. And so we need to understand, we need to look back and see what made it so easy to adopt and own by the government, which we can then try and replicate across something else that we might want to put in.
Thank you so much all. I have been told that we are out of time, unfortunately. I saw many hands. Please do continue the conversation. Feel free to approach the panelists. I hope they'll be around. We have the rest of the day ahead of us. So please do approach them for the conversation. We'll be concluding the panel, but this has been a very, very insightful conversation, being able to step back and reflect on these questions about both all of our journeys on the outcomes-based instrument, but what does systems change mean, and how we are bringing that language and inspiration to all of us. I think maybe I'll stop saying systems and say all of us. I think has been a wonderful conversation. I think what I'm taking away is the fact that today, as a group of organizations coming together, we have a point of view of what it means to create systems change. We have taken some steps in terms of measuring that systems change, bringing language to that systems change, but it is still an evolving conversation that we as a group need to push further ahead. And maybe the next time that we meet in another year from now, another year of the DIP having gone through, we'll have a far more, we'll be able to build on this conversation. Thank you so much to the four of you for taking out time and being on this panel, and a huge round of applause for them. Thank you so much.